The transmission came at 0300 Galactic Standard Time. A flicker of static. A distortion in deep space sensors. The monitoring officers at Council High Command dismissed it at first, just another cosmic anomaly. Then the screaming began. Admiral Xerus of the Apex War Legions slammed his clawed hand against the control panel, his scaled face contorting in frustration. The flickering holoscreen displayed garbled footage, blurry, unfocused, but the voices came through crystal clear. They came out of nowhere. No, and oh. A shriek. Then static. Someone tell me what the hell is happening. Xerus roared. A trembling officer, young, inexperienced, stammered. Sir, the Abyss Patrol fleet has gone completely dark. We lost all contact. Impossible, Xerus hissed. Those ships were state-of-the-art. Shields impenetrable. Armament unrivaled. No force in this galaxy could. The transmission resumed. A broken, wheezing sound. Not static, breathing. Then, a voice. Deep. Cold. Human. Did you think we would forget? Silence fell across the command chamber. No one moved. No one even breathed. Then chaos erupted. Xerus felt something he hadn't felt in over a century, primal fear. His claws retracted involuntarily. His throat dried. Run diagnostics, he barked. Trace the signal. We can't, sir, an officer stammered. The source is shifting. It's like they're everywhere. Xerus clenched his jaw. That voice. It spoke a language he had studied in secret. A dialect that hadn't been uttered in the Council's grand halls for millennia. A language that had been erased. His scales prickled with realization. No, it's not possible. The Grand Chamber doors burst open. High Chancellor Xyroth entered, his massive, bloated form reeking of authority and fear. Behind him, the Council elders followed, whispering in frantic, desperate tones. Xyroth's voice was like grinding stone. Admiral Xerus. Explain this, madness. Xerus gestured wildly to the screen. They're back. The lost ones. The humans. A collective shudder passed through the room. The whispers stopped. Dead silence. Then, laughter. Cold. Amused. Dismissive. You are mistaken, Admiral, Xyroth said. His eyes gleamed with something between arrogance and unease. The lost ones were eradicated eons ago. Their name, their history, their very existence was purged. Xerus' voice rose. Then explain that transmission. Explain why an entire fleet just. The holomap flickered violently. A new signal appeared. Not from the Abyss Patrol fleet. From inside their own system. Impossible, an officer whispered. The signal pulsed, like a heartbeat. Then, in every language known to the Council, a single word appeared on screen. Hello. Then, the lights died. The chamber plunged into darkness. Xerus' breath hitched. Shields up. Lock the system down now. Too late. The chamber filled with whispers. Distant. Echoing. You erased our name. A sharp click. Every screen turned on at once. The officers recoiled in horror. The Council elders gasped. Live footage. The Abyss Patrol fleet was gone. Not destroyed. Not even wreckage. Just erased. In its place, something loomed. A ship unlike anything ever seen. Vast. Towering. Silent. Watching. Its surface shifted like liquid metal, yet its presence was solid, too solid. The void around it seemed to bend, as if the very laws of reality were fraying at the edges. And then, movement. Figures. Stepping out from the nothingness. Tall. Armored. Human. One led them. His armor was black as night, his presence impossibly heavy. His cold, predatory gaze pierced through the transmission, as if staring directly at the council itself. Then, he spoke. "Do you know what fear is?" Xyroth stiffened. Who are you?" The man tilted his head slightly. His face was unreadable. His voice unshaken. "I am Commander Darius Kane of the Voidborn Legion. Heir to the Forgotten. Warlord of the Exiled." Silence. Deadly. Absolute. Kane took a slow, deliberate step forward. The hollow feed flickered, but his voice remained sharp, unwavering. 2,000 years ago, your kind wiped out my people. You burned our worlds. Erased our history. Turned our bones into fuel for your war machines. Zira's stomach twisted. They knew. They all knew. You called us monsters. Another step. Closer. Unstoppable. But the real monsters are you. Xyroth swallowed hard. Listen, we can talk. Kane's head tilted again. A mockery of curiosity. Talk? A smirk, cold, calculating. You didn't talk when you burned Earth. The transmission distorted. New images flashed. Archives long thought erased. Images of human captives. Chained. Experimented on. Harvested. A child, eyes wide in terror, screaming as alien hands tore her apart. Kane's voice dropped to a whisper. Do you know what it's like to hear a child scream before you kill her? Xyroth staggered back. We had to. We remember everything. The entire chamber shook. A new alert appeared, breach detected. Sir, an officer whimpered. They're inside. The council had no time to react. The doors exploded inward. And the slaughter began. The war had begun. Darius Kane stood at the bridge of his flagship, the Oblivion's Wrath, watching the fractured remains of the council's fleet drift like shattered bone through the void. The Apex War Legions, the council's so-called invincible force, had lasted a total of 12 minutes. He turned away from the viewing screen, his voice cold and sharp. Status? A synthetic voice hummed in response. Phase 1 engagement complete. 72% of enemy forces neutralized. Remaining ships attempting retreat. Kane's expression did not change. Attempting? The voice continued, unfazed. Their navigation systems have been compromised. They are flying blind. Shall we allow them to flee? A short pause. Then, Kane exhaled slowly. No. A single word. A death sentence. Across the battlefield, the darkness shifted. Silent warforms, black as the abyss, emerged from nothingness. Weapons did not fire, there was no need. The enemy ships folded inward, crumpling like paper as invisible forces crushed them. Kane didn't watch. There was nothing left to see. Prepare the ground assault, he ordered. His officers nodded. They did not question him. They never had. The holomap flickered, displaying the next target, the Council's prime military stronghold, Xiphos Prime. The planet was a fortress, its orbital defenses capable of repelling entire armadas. Against anything but humanity. Drop pods are primed, an officer confirmed. Voidborn strike teams are awaiting final orders. Kane's gaze hardened. Deploy. From above, the skies opened. Thousands of black pods ripped through the atmosphere like falling meteors. Council garrisons scrambled, weapons primed, blaring emergency sirens across the capital. It didn't matter. The first impact tremors shattered the city's foundations. Streets cracked. Buildings collapsed. The Council's warriors rushed to meet the invaders. Then, the pods opened. And the killing began. Kane hit the ground running, his warblade humming with barely contained energy. The first alien soldier lunged, scaled, armed with plasma talons. Kane moved before it could react. A flash of motion. A wet, choking gurgle. He didn't stop. The battlefield was chaos. Voidborn cut through the enemy ranks, moving like shadows, faster than anything organic had the right to be. The Council's warlords, creatures bred for combat over millennia, were being slaughtered like cattle. A war beast charged Kane, its tusks crackling with raw energy. He dodged, twisted, and drove his blade through its skull in a single motion. Blood spattered across his armor. He didn't even blink. From the high walls, turrets locked onto him. Massive cannons, enough firepower to reduce cities to rubble. Kane didn't slow down. A pulse of energy radiated from his body. The turrets froze. Their operators twitched, their nervous systems hijacked by something beyond their understanding. Kane spoke into their minds. Run. Most didn't. They died screaming. A transmission crackled through his comms. Commander, Central Command Post is secured. High Warden Rylos is still inside. Kane's smirk was pure ice. On my way. He strode through burning corridors, stepping over bodies. The Council's last line of defense, a dozen elite guards, stood at the entrance to the command chamber. Kill him, their leader snarled. They charged. Kane did not move. The walls darkened. The air hummed. Reality itself shifted. And then, they were gone. Not dead. Just, gone. Kane stepped through the now unbarred doors. High Warden Rylos, a towering, armored warlord, stood trembling at the end of the chamber. For the first time in his life, he was afraid. Kane tilted his head. Is that fear, Warden? Rylos swallowed. Then he lunged. Faster than most beings could see. But Kane was faster. He sidestepped. Twisted. Grabbed the alien's wrist and snapped it like dry twigs. Rylos screamed. Kane shoved him to the ground, planting a boot against his chest. You've spent centuries butchering my kind, he said, voice cold. Tell me, does it feel different when it happens to you? Rylos snarled. You don't understand. We had to. Kane pressed harder. Had to what? He asked softly. Rylos gasped. Your people were unstable. Dangerous. We had no choice. Kane smiled. It was a terrifying thing. You had a choice. He leaned closer. And you chose wrong. With a flick of his wrist, he snapped the warden's neck. Silence. A single message played over the planetary network. Xiphos Prime has fallen. The age of the Council is over. Kane turned from the body. Prepare for the next strike. The war was just beginning. The transmission spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Xiphos Prime had fallen. The Council's most fortified military stronghold, reduced to nothing in a matter of hours. The broadcast played on every frequency, across every system, sending a single, unshakable message. Humanity had returned. And they were unstoppable. On the Council's throne world, the High Chancellor's chambers were in chaos. Alien dignitaries shouted over one another, their voices filled with fear and desperation. The ruling elite, creatures of all shapes and species, had once commanded absolute power. Now, they trembled. This is impossible, spat Supreme Warlord Gelos, his mandibles clicking erratically. Xiphos Prime was the impenetrable heart of our empire. It could not have fallen. It did, said a voice. Cold. Unshaken. All eyes turned to Xyroth, the High Chancellor. His bloated, grotesque form barely moved as he stared at the holographic feed. The images played on loop, human soldiers, cutting through their finest warriors like they were nothing. They've evolved, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. One of the elder advisors, an ancient being whose species had lived through the last war with humanity, pressed forward, his many eyes filled with horror. They shouldn't exist, he hissed. We erased them. We did more than that, Xyroth said, his tone unreadable. The room fell silent. They all knew. The Council's history books spoke of humanity's extinction, but behind closed doors, in the darkest corners of their empire, there were secrets. The experiments. The genetic harvesting. The centuries of forced evolution done in the name of power. The Council hadn't wiped humanity out. They had created something far worse. A new alert flared on the holomap. Another fleet destroyed. Another world lost. They are moving too fast, an officer choked out. We can't track their movements. Their ships, it's as if they aren't bound by the laws of physics. A deep, rumbling voice cut through the panic. You're only seeing the beginning. The hologram shifted. And there, standing before them, was him. Darius Kane. A being who should not exist. A ghost of a species long buried, staring through the transmission as if he could see them all, standing in their chamber, suffocating in their fear. His armor was black as the void. His eyes burned like dying stars. And when he spoke, the room froze. You look surprised. His voice carried no emotion, only certainty. Zyroth clenched his fists, his massive form tightening in his seat. Kane. Kane's head tilted, as if amused. So you do remember my name. That's good. Because soon, it's all you'll have left. A warlord slammed his fist onto the table. You dare address us as equals? You are an anomaly. A species that should have been erased. You think you can challenge the most powerful empire in the galaxy? Kane let out a breath. Was it laughter? No. Something colder. I don't think, he said. I know. The warlord lunged for the controls, aiming to cut the transmission, but the feed did not end. It did not flicker. It did not waver. Instead, it grew stronger. You misunderstand something, Kane continued. I didn't come here to talk. A chill ran through the council. I came here, Kane said slowly, to show you. The chamber shook. Sirens blared. Panic spread like wildfire. One of the officers turned, their multiple arms scrambling at a console. S. Supreme Chancellor. W. We're detecting. The hologram changed. Now, the council wasn't staring at Kane. They were staring out their own windows. At the sky. At the thousands of black ships descending upon their throne world. Kane's voice was a death knell. I never needed to find you. His smirk was pure ice. You led me straight here. Explosions ripped through the lower districts of the capital. The Council's planetary defenses activated, turrets locking onto the human fleet. The ships did not evade. They did not fire back. Instead, they vanished. Not into hyperspace. Not cloaking. They simply ceased to be. Then, the planetary defenses turned inward. The Council's own weapons began firing on their own people. Screams filled the chamber. One of the strategists wailed, their technology, IT, it's hacking our systems. They've taken control. Kane was still there. Watching. Waiting. A single phrase flickered onto every screen in the chamber. We remember. And then, the doors burst open. The Voidborn were here. Tall. Silent. Unstoppable. The last war had taken centuries. This one would take minutes. A council general drew his weapon, firing wildly. The energy blast never landed. Kane caught it in his bare hand. The room fell into dead silence. The general staggered back, trembling. This isn't possible, he whispered. You're monsters. Kane smiled. No. He drove his warblade into the alien's chest. We're the consequence. The chamber fell apart in fire and blood. This was not war. This was extinction. The throne room reeked of fear. High Chancellor Zyroth's massive form trembled as he stared at the carnage unfolding before him. His elite guards, warriors bred over millennia, lay in twisted, lifeless heaps at Kane's feet. Their weapons, once symbols of unstoppable authority, were silent, useless against the force that had torn through the heart of the Galactic Council in mere hours. Kane stepped forward, his boots echoing against the polished obsidian floor. His presence was suffocating. The Voidborn Legion stood behind him, black-armored figures, silent as the abyss itself, awaiting his command. The Chancellor's many eyes darted toward the shattered remains of the Council Elders, once the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Their bodies were broken, some unrecognizable, others still clinging to life, gurgling in pain as they bled out on the cold stone. "You!" Xyrotha's voice wavered, his once booming authority reduced to a whisper. "You don't understand what you've done." Kane tilted his head slightly. "Enlighten me." The Chancellor swallowed hard, forcing down the bile rising in his throat. "The Council, we were the only thing holding this galaxy together. You may have killed us, but without us, there will be chaos. Civil war. Anarchy. You think you've won, but you've doomed countless civilizations." Kane's smirk was cold, humorless. "I think you misunderstand what winning looks like." The Chancellor's many eyes blazed with desperation. "You need us." "No," Kane said simply. "The galaxy needed justice. And I've delivered it." The air shifted, growing heavier as Kane stepped closer. Xyroth could feel it, the weight of a species that had been erased, buried, and forgotten, now standing before him as something infinitely worse. "You spent centuries trying to mold the universe in your image," Kane continued. "Deciding which species thrived, which were dangerous, which deserved to exist." His hand tightened into a fist, and Xyroth felt something crack inside him. He gasped, choking on his own breath. "You called us monsters," Kane whispered. "Experimented on my people. Harvested them. And when you realized you couldn't break us, you tried to erase us." Xyrotha's vision blurred as pain racked his body. He knew what was happening. He had seen this before, on battlefields where the Voidborn had unmade entire fleets without firing a single shot. "You," he wheezed, "you're not human." Kane smiled, but there was no warmth. "You're right," he said. Then, in one swift motion, Kane seized the Chancellor by the throat, lifting the massive creature off the ground with terrifying ease. "The thing is, Chancellor," Kane whispered, his voice a blade against the Chancellor's mind, "we tried peace once. We tried diplomacy. We tried to be like you." He tightened his grip. Xyroth gurgled, clawing at the hand crushing his windpipe. "But you made us something else," Kane murmured. "You made us evolve." A deep crack echoed through the chamber as Xyrotha's body went limp. Kane dropped the corpse without a second thought. Silence. The throne room, once the beating heart of galactic dominance, was now nothing but a mass grave. Kane turned toward the towering throne at the end of the chamber. It was carved from the obsidian remains of conquered worlds, forged from the bones of civilizations the Council had slaughtered. He stared at it for a long moment. Then, without hesitation, he turned away. One of his officers, a hardened Voidborn named Elias Voss, stepped forward. "Commander, the planet is secured. All resistance has been eliminated." Kane nodded. "Status of the remaining Council forces?" "Scattered," Voss reported. "Some are trying to flee to the outer systems. Others have surrendered outright. Without the Chancellor and the Elders, there's no central authority left. The Council is gone." Kane exhaled slowly. It was done. "Then it's time," he said. Voss's expression darkened. "Are you sure?" Kane turned to face him. "Do you think they deserve mercy?" Voss hesitated, then shook his head. "No." Kane glanced toward the center of the throne room, where a single control terminal pulsed with dim energy. The final protocol. The one the Council had designed but never dared to use. A last resort contingency built into the heart of their empire, meant to erase entire planetary systems if necessary. Only the High Chancellor had access. Kane stepped toward the console. The system scanned him. Recognized the blood still dripping from his hands. A single phrase appeared on the screen. "Execute extinction event?" Kane pressed his palm against the scanner. The system blinked. Authorization granted. A low, terrifying hum reverberated through the planet. Across the Council's remaining core worlds, sirens blared in warning. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, the Council's empire burned. One by one, the planets vanished. Not destroyed. Not bombed. Not conquered. Erased. Wiped from existence in an instant, just as they had tried to do to humanity. When the final world disintegrated, when the last remnant of the Council ceased to be, Kane turned away from the screen. His mission was complete. Voss exhaled, shaking his head in awe. "It's over," he murmured. Kane's expression did not change. "No." Voss frowned. "Sir?" Kane stared into the void beyond the shattered throne room. Beyond the broken empire. "This was just the beginning," he said. Then he stepped into the darkness, and the galaxy would never be the same.